Hi, church. Thanks again for joining us for our 5-minute devotion time. Just 5 minutes to kick off your day. Hopefully they are relevant for you, encourage you, maybe give you something to think about. If any time that you have a question, a thought, feel free to post them right there on our video. You can also comment by text or email. We'd appreciate your feedback. I want to remind you as well that we have about 50 plus videos that are already loaded on our website, northalbany.org. You can check those out at any time and feel free to share them with other people as well. We're going to continue in our character studies, men and women of the Bible who we can glean some understanding from and maybe put them into our lives as we view their failures and successes. We're going to be looking at this guy, David. David I kind of see as a modern day outlaw. He's a guy who's rugged and takes risk. He's impetuous. He lives on the run with his band of merry men and out in the open country, kind of like a modern day cowboy. And yet, in the midst of all this, he rises to be the king over all Israel and Judah. It's an amazing story. And a lot is known about David. We know a lot because a lot is written about him throughout the Old Testament and references to him in the New Testament as well. But here's a guy, David, who was born into a large family. He was the 8th son of Jesse. Now, as a Jew, you would know who Jesse was. He was going to be of the kingly line where the Messiah would come from. So as a Jew, you would know about Jesse. Here was a kid who you didn't have to say, hey, go run outside and go play. You got to get your outside time on. No way. David was outside. That was his profession, was shepherding, tending the livestock. In fact, David, early on, we know, was very good with his hands. He probably taught himself, along with his other brothers, to defend himself, became a great warrior, was very skilled with lots of weapons, I would assume. We know early on that he took out a lion and a bear in his care of the sheep as a shepherd. We also know that he had the great triumph and courage when he defeated the giant Goliath. Here's what he said during that time. He said, I come before you in the name of the Lord Almighty. He will deliver you into my hands. He says this to Goliath. So David was a pretty courageous guy. Another thing we know about David is that God was active in David's early life. His spirit was on David, the Bible says. And we also know about David that he had many acts of worship. And he shared and recounted songs that he put in the book of Psalms for us. So many great things, along with being careful with King Saul. David was anointed king during Saul's reign, and yet he waited, he was patient for King Saul and for God too to complete his kingship. So we know all this about him, as well as this unbelievable statement that says that David was a guy after God's own heart. Pretty sparkling guy. Doesn't sound like he makes a lot of mistakes. Well, we know that he did. In fact, in his lust and his power, he committed adultery. And right after that, he committed murder. How can this be a guy after God's own heart? Another failure was that he took an unauthorized census. People in his government said, begged David, please don't do this. This is not what the Lord wants. And David said, this is what I'm going to do anyway. And severe judgment came against him and the people. How can this be a guy after God's own heart? Well, folks, I believe what we can learn from David is that he humbled himself and his heart was fully engaged with God, and God, in turn, forgave him. You know, God can forgive the most atrocious of sins, the most shameful acts, the things that drive us away, that we don't want to tell anybody about, he can forgive those as well. You know, you see, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. He knows that there's not even one of us that's righteous. So if we give our hearts to him and we humble ourselves, he will in turn forgive us. Folks, something else that we have to be reminded of, once we puff ourselves up and we're full of pride and we think that we cannot sin like that, or we get puffed up and think, oh, I'm not a sinner like that, be careful, because I think the enemy is crouching at our door, looking over our shoulder to look for a way to get at us. 1 Chronicles 21 is a testament of that in David's life, and I encourage you to read that. But folks, humbling ourselves and confessing is what draws us to God. Perhaps you don't know him. I want to encourage you to just give your life to him. Humble yourself right where you're at now and say, God, I need you. I've done some things in the past, and I want to just lay them at your feet right now. Please come into my life and make me whole. So we just thank you for your time. And again, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to let us know. Thanks again for watching.